Okay guys, so we're gonna talk about the second pillar of army design, which is durability. That's when you can essentially, keep your army on the board and handle an alpha strike.
Yeah, your durability is your ability to receive an alpha strike in the face and hit your opponent back. Now, there are a number of different ways to build an army that is durable, that can receive this. And I would argue that this is the biggest weakness in most people's armies. People design an army around an alpha strike, they don't get the first turn, they're like, I've lost, right? And they just give up. But there are a number of different ways of doing it. So we've got an amazing list here, so we're gonna read it out to you. The very first thing is high toughness. So I'll give you an example of my Nurgle army, which is a very high toughness army. On the first turn of the game, my army is either in Dreadclaw Droppods, which means they are not on the board, or they have a toughness of 8, because the only things I deploy are Plague Burst Crawlers, and then behind them are characters. You can't target the characters because the Plague Burst Crawlers are closer, and everything else is in Droppods off the board. So at the first turn of the game, the only thing you can shoot are toughness 8 vehicles with disgustingly resilient. That is going to reduce every wound you pump against them by 1, and you've got to get through a toughness of 8, you've got to get through a 3-up save. I try and put them in cover, which makes it a 2-up save, and basically none of that is pleasant for you to have to deal with, okay? So against everything I'm getting saving throws, I'm reducing your damage, you've got to get through a toughness of 8. Your bolt guns, your las guns, your basic firepower is bouncing off my tanks, and it makes sure that I am going to get my alpha strike. You're going to get hit in the face with a ton of entropy cannons and their mortars, and then you've got demon princes that are going to jump out from behind with smite and charge into close combat, not to mention the drop pods that are going to give you some plague marines to contest all of your objectives. So high toughness, you could literally build an army that's all high toughness. Even space marines have the ability to do that. If you switch to having heavy intercessors, you can make it so nothing in your army has a lower toughness than 5. You could be taking bikes, you can be taking Gravis armor marines, and as long as everything has a toughness of 5 or higher, guns that have strength 3 or strength 4 are really going to struggle against you. So that's a really good one. The next way to be tough.
The next way to be tough is with invul saves. So when you look at Eldar armies, they're kind of the poster child of this.
The Harlequin armies, for example, almost all of them are going to have an invulnerable save, a 4-up save. And so thinking about maximizing invulnerable saves is key. Remember, your opponent's going to be looking for weaknesses though. So if you take an army where half of them have invulnerable saves and the other half don't, then they're probably going to focus their alpha strike against the things that don't have invulnerable saves to reduce the size of your army. By making sure that that just isn't an option, because the things without invulnerable saves aren't seen, they're just not visible, you really make it difficult for your opponent to do anything about it. I like taking artifacts that give an invulnerable save to units that don't normally have them. An example would be Azrael, the Dark Angel's character, who puts a 4-up invulnerable save on units nearby him. This enables him to give an invulnerable save to things like Hellblasters or Eradicators that normally wouldn't have an invulnerable save, and that means it hasn't been factored into their points cost, which means your opponent is going to want to take those off the board because they're nice juicy targets, but they're not available as a target. So invulnerable saves are a very good way to go about making sure your army is a lot more durable. Next up, transports. I love transports. I will literally do anything I can to deploy my entire army in transports if I can. The transportation vehicles that you can take in Warhammer 40,000, there's more than there's ever been. There's so many different types. And you make it so that you've got a nice crispy shell that your opponent has to break through to get to the juice inside. And there are some very powerful units that have really good guns that have a low toughness. So we're talking about things like Drakari armies, Sisters of Battle, things that like just have that toughness of 3 that's just a little bit too easy to chew through, with things like assault cannons that have a strength of 6 and a wounding on 2s. You put them in a vehicle with a toughness of 7, that assault cannon is now pretty much ineffective. Strength 6, toughness 7, it's wounding on 5s, it's just not going to do as much. So you can really minimize your opponent's chances to shoot you by making sure your things are inside vehicles. An Astra Militarum army is a great way of doing this. If all of your units are inside chimeras, you've now got that higher toughness across the army. Your opponent is expecting to deal with a horde, but your horde has a high toughness because they're all inside vehicles.
Yeah.
So they're
to deal with that. That's nasty.
Right, yeah, the anti-horde guns don't do anything, right? So that's a really good way to think about it, is like think about what transports can you use and how survivable can you make the transports? Can we put the transports behind cover to boost the save? Can you take something like an impulsor and use a shield dome to give it a 4-up invulnerable save? That way that impulsor is going to get across the battlefield before anybody takes it out. Think about what kind of transport you're using as well. What's the toughness of it? Like, does it make sense to use a couple of rhinos or a land raider? Do we want the extra wounds and the extra toughness? Really really think about what you're putting in it and how much firepower it's going to take in order to build that up. So that's another good one, is to use transports. Next one.
Next one is going to be ablative wounds. So I love the concept of ablative wounds. When you introduced that to me, I was just like, God, this is gold. Because my favorite infantry gun is Reaper chain cannons. So what I love to do is I'll throw a Reaper chain cannon on a Space Marine and, you know, put him in a squad and use the other Space Marines carrying bolt guns or chain swords, whatever, as wounds for the chain cannon. And so it's essentially taking a weapon that you want to use, putting it in a squad, and then using the rest of the squad as wounds for that weapon.
Yeah, it's a really good way of thinking about it, of just adding extra models to squads to increase the chances of you keeping alive that character, right? So if you boosted a sergeant who's really good in close combat with a thunder hammer and a storm shield, just gave him some really good stuff, and then just to add extra models in the unit to keep the sergeant alive for when he connects in close combat. A meat shield nugget, people are saying. Yeah, it's a good example. So for example, you can do this with Katachan jungle fighters, because you can give every sergeant a power fist, and they actually get a boost to their strength. So you've essentially got strength 8 power fists running around the board with 9 ablative wounds. So that is a very nasty combo that you can do, and we can build out, and we can make that guy beefy in combat, and suddenly all of your infantry squads have this strength 8 threat inside them because of the power fist, and you've just got to, you know, get them across the battlefield, and that's what the ablative wounds are helping to do. One of my favorite ways to be durable is actually teleporting on the board. Anything that is not on the board on turn 1 can't be shot, and there is no better way to stay safe than not being there. I think drop pods are a massive part of 9th edition meta, and I think that the tournament scene just hasn't worked out how huge they are. The ability to not be on the board on the first turn for your opponent's Alpha Strike, and then turn up on turn 1 and blast, has been a staple through the history of Warhammer 40,000. At the beginning of 8th edition, drop pods were nerfed so badly that nobody played them because they couldn't turn up until turn 2, and a turn 2 Alpha Strike just isn't that good. But since they corrected it, and now at the beginning of 9th and even at the back end of 8th, drop pods can arrive on turn 1, I just think people haven't remembered how powerful they are. Having a pair of drop pods with a pair of Devastator squads inside them, dropping in on the first turn of the game and unloading. This gives you a number of things. One, that drop pod gets to land near an objective and take control of a middle of the board objective. So that's going to sit there the whole game on that objective, holding it for you. Meanwhile, your unit inside can leave and go and shoot. Now, we have a special rule that we haven't seen for a very long time, in fact, maybe even ever with Space Marines, which is to pay 2 command points and act as if that Space Marine unit didn't move. Heavy weapons get -1 to shoot unless they move. If you're playing Dark Angels, where if they don't move, they get +1 to hit, unless they FAQ this after me saying this, you can drop pod in a squad of Dark Angel Devastators, move them out of the drop pod onto a second objective, so I'm now holding 2 objectives, blast with those Dark Angels hitting on 2s because I paid 2 command points to count like they didn't move, right? So that is a very nasty durability reverse Alpha Strike. And so that's like a very cool strategy that you can do. Not to imagine things like jump packs coming in, which automatically come in on turn 2. So they survive that first turn, they can drop in, and then you can do all sorts of cool stuff with them, right? So that's another great way of doing it. So teleporting in, absolutely huge. That also functions for teleporting across the board. So you can set up in the corner of the board where no one can see you, and then use Veil of Darkness or the Jump, which is the Orc ability, to move somewhere else on the board and suddenly be very effective. So that's another way of doing it.
And then we have another aspect of durability to go with this, and that is going to be layers in your army. I recently had to go up against this with a Death Guard army, and it was tough. It's like peeling away different layers of that army. And essentially what it was he had kind of the Plague Burst crawler thing, and with the drop pod, but there was another version where he had the Plague Marines and then the Plague Burst Crawler and the Demon Prince. And essentially, there was a stratagem he used where I had to target the closest model.
Yeah, so Death Guard have a strategy that basically stops you shooting a model unless it's the closest model. And so a stratagem. So what they can do is they can make it so that the Demon Prince can't be targeted because the Plague Marines are closer, and the Plague Marines can't be targeted because a Plague Burst Crawler is closer. So you can make it so they have to kill the Plague Burst Crawler, and if their guns aren't effective at killing the Plague Burst Crawler, for example, they're anti-infantry and you really want to be shooting Plague Marines with them, tough, you have to shoot the Plague Burst Crawler first, and so all your shots get wasted if you can't kill it, and that allows everything to stay alive. So essentially this is known as screening, where you're gonna put units in front of units that have to be shot first, either because of a special rule or because things are literally just not available to be seen. Another example of using screening is to deny people teleporting in. A good army for doing this is a good unit for doing this are the infiltrators with Space Marines. With infiltrators, you can make it so your opponent can't teleport in within 12 inches. That means if I have 2 squads of infiltrators that are 20 inches apart, you can't land in between them because you can't be 12 inches away from both units. If I have 3 squads of infiltrators, and remember, infiltrators can set up in the middle of the battlefield, I can set up 3 squads of infiltrators at 20-inch intervals all across the battlefield for 60 inches across the board, and you actually cannot teleport in to the middle of the battlefield. You are locked off from teleporting in, except in your own deployment zone on the first turn of the game, until those infiltrators are removed. So that is a great way of stopping somebody from teleporting behind your lines, or using the jump to get into close combat range. Sure, you can kill my infiltrators, but you're gonna have to be 12 inches away from them, and you're probably not gonna make a double 6 charge. So none of that is going to be pleasant for you. And that's another way of using screening and layers to create durability. You're essentially forcing everybody to be too far away. This is really effective against close combat armies that really want to try and get that first turn charge off against you because you're just denying them from happening. And another great way of doing it is to surround vehicles with infantry. If you know that somebody wants to come and touch your vehicles because they want to maybe beat them up in close combat, putting a squad of 10 men around them with like 1-inch space in between them just stops anybody from physically getting close enough to the model. If you can't fit, you can't sit, and if you can't sit, you can't hit me in close combat. And so surrounding models with other models just really makes it nasty. A good example is we have a Necron player. He plays with 20 warriors as standard, and he slaps his overlord right in the middle of them. You cannot shoot it, you cannot charge it. That overlord is there, and he's going to use the resurrection orb and bring those Necron warriors back over and over again, which is actually a good example of his durability. Necrons have a natural durability because of their ability to reanimate, and if you put like a canoptic reanimator near them, which is going to enable them to come back on a 4-up, they naturally reroll 1s. If you have a lord near them, that lord is going to boost them as well. And again, while you can still shoot the reanimator, which is something people will do to try and kill it, if you surround it with the Necron warriors, you stop people from touching it in close combat. And that, again, reduces their ability to kill it. They're going to have to shoot it off the board. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways of doing that. So that's durability. But durability and alpha striking are only going to work if you've calculated the mathematical probability of everything works, which brings us to the third pillar of army design, which is probability.